And the amazing thing really is that this claim was ever brought because those policies were intended to eliminate those important issues of Māori society from the world, really. The Māori cultural renaissance came from Māori as a response eventually in the 1970s and 1980s and is still with us now. And I don't think anyone now seriously believes that we can go back to a policy of integration, although some politicians do talk about it. Some of my report also went back to the earlier legislation like Tohunga Suppression Act. The Tohunga Suppression Act was a very heavy sledgehammer that essentially criminalised tohunga in any form, so that whether it was the traditional carriers of wisdom or even the holding of wānanga became doubtful. Even people like Princess Tapuia would never talk about her Paimarire beliefs because she feared that Pākehā would identify her as a tohunga and that would lead you to be liable to prosecution. So there were a whole range of important belief systems that Māori had to keep to themselves, and unfortunately, as this claim has pointed out, much of the old knowledge went to the grave with those people, with those tohunga, because they were afraid to hand it on. And so that's one of the hurts that this claim is seeking to have addressed.
What motivated Ngāti Wai to become part of the Wai 262 claim was scientists who were doing research on tuatara on the offshore islands were clipping their toes and that off to mark them for future identification. We felt that the atuas didn't put the toes on there for nothing, and so I reported it back to my board and our kāhui kaumātua kuia, and they asked what are some of the options for us to do something about it, and I said to them that we could become a claimant to the Wai 262 claim. To us, the tuatara under LORE is our responsibility, it's our tonga. Under LAW, the Department of Conservation has a statutory responsibility over the management and the protection of tuatara. Ngāti Wai's resource management is based upon whanaungatanga, not only whanaungatanga with each other as human beings, but whanaungatanga with all of the uri of Papanui, Tuanuku and Ranginui. And it's on that basis that we see the tuatara as a tuakana to ourselves, the tangata. And obviously we have responsibilities to understand some of the impacts on tuatara and to join with the Department of Conservation in that management. It's about clawing back our right to have some say and some influence in the way these resources are being managed so that we could continue to protect and practice the manaakitanga that was given to us by our ancestors.
The flora and fauna claim in respect of Ngāti Wai is very, very important. It is important because Ngāti Wai needs to retain its identity, and that it was important for them to ensure that their knowledge base needed to be retained, and they needed to give expression to all the forums and all the institutions in terms of our mātauranga and our understanding of it.
Wai 262 is important to me because it's the only means that we have to put our case to the government in recognizing our intellectual property rights. Our knowledge base is the only thing we've got left that hasn't been stolen from us. And so this gives us the opportunity to put in place processes that will assist to protect what is ours and that we can maintain some form of control over our knowledge base.
What is peculiar about Ngāti Wai and Te Rohe are the many groups of islands around it, and they're all iconic They're all very, very important. Ngāti Wai lived on most of those islands, and that is very, very peculiar to the Tai Tokero. We've had to bear the wrath of the Crown in terms of being evicted from some of those islands, in particular the Hauturu Little Barrier, the Poor Knights Islands, known as Tāwhitirahi, Me Aorangi, Mimi Whangata, and our identity is very, very important. And of course, the islands being taken by the Crown without any consultation with Ngāti Wai has been a really, really sad indictment on the loss of a lot of our iconic taonga that's been handed down to us, handed down to Ngāti Wai. And the acquisitions of our islands is most important under this claim, under the flora and fauna claim. And of course, it is vitally important that we retain and acquire those islands back in its current state.
I've been with the Ngāti Wai Trust Board now for 25 years, and most of that time I've been responsible for the Resource Management Act, the Conservation Act, and trying to find some balance between Māori resource management, kaitiakitanga, and those new legislation like the Conservation Act and the Resource Management Act. I believe that there are a lot of things that we do in kaitiakitanga that the Resource Management Act or the Conservation Act doesn't do. We have a different kind of a regard for the environment in terms of its usefulness as a food source, as a rongoa, as a rāranga, and so on. Whereas the Department of Conservation manages under the Conservation Act in a different way altogether. For me, it's about balancing the Māori ways of resource management with the ways that are being developed through the Resource Management Act and the Conservation Act to get some balance between ourselves and Western paradigm.
We continue to work with the department. We also continue to be part of the to give direction to Department of Conservation, and we are very, very assured that we are going to pursue the acquisition of our taonga or the co-management of it with the Department of Conservation.
In 1992, there was a report in the Herald, a kōrero from Dr. Ranginui Walker, who was concerned that the Department of Conservation was eradicating kiore from islands in the South Island. And of course, it was through that report in the Herald that it brought it to our attention that the kiore wasn't being discussed in any real depth with tangata whenua. So we notified the Department of Conservation because we knew that they would eventually end up here, and we said to them that we would like to engage with some discussion. We don't disagree that the kiore is having an impact on the islands, but what we do know is that it's been over 100 years since Ngāti Wai's kaitiakitanga was being practiced. Since the government took over the islands for lighthouses and so on, that required then for Ngāti Wai, if it wanted to go out and do its cull, that it would have to get a permit off the government. That seemed to be very similar to other issues about rating Māori land. Māoris didn't even bother to go and get a permit. In a lot of cases, they didn't continue their kaitiakitanga. So for more than 100 years, the kiore has multiplied out on those islands. There's been no management at all through our kaitiakitanga or from the government's own systems until the creation of the Department of Conservation.
Kaitiakitanga in Ngāti Wai is most important to the extent that every hapu in Ngāti Wai has their own variation of kaitiakitanga. For me, amongst my hapu, Kaitiakitanga to us is the protection of our tapu, the protection of our wahi tapu and our burial grounds, and of course the handing down of knowledge from the tohunga down to those who are going to carry that knowledge in terms of kaitiakitanga into the future. And so it's vitally important for Ngāti Wai in terms of kaitiakitanga because we pride ourselves in terms of kaitiakitanga, and we want to be the guardians, we want to be the holders of all that knowledge, and that the only way you can articulate that in kaitiakitanga is giving expression to the protection of your taonga tuku iho, and the knowledge that's been handed down from your kaumātua and your kuia down to